All right, so time to get down to work because we are coming to the end of the book of Bamidbar, the book of the stories of our trek in the wilderness. And what have most of those stories revolved around?
Conflict.
Conflict, or what was the title of the book you just pulled off the shelf?
Sapient. Oh, Born to Kvetch.
Born to Kvetch. We have complained and complained and complained. 40 years worth of complaints now. And much of the Book of Bamidbar has been the complaints that were leveled and then how they have been handled, the complaint department, how it has handled it. We have had complaints about the food. We have had complaints about the length of the trip. We have had complaints about our inability to get to Israel sooner rather than later. We have had complaints about the power structure. We have had complaints about the fair distribution of the perks of spirituality. And now we're going to get, well, we'll see, maybe not necessarily a complaint, but an issue that will come up that could be a complaint. And it certainly feels like a complaint when it first gets raised. But to understand it, we have to do a little bit of backstory, which I don't want to read, so we'll discuss it. You may remember a little while ago we had that issue in Parashat Balak, the whole issue of the Midianites and the Moabites not being terribly happy with us walking past their territories, and so they tried to get us to be cursed. That didn't stick. Then they ended up seducing and with their ladies and through idolatry. And that was 20-some thousand of our people dead. Well, after these conflicts and these problems, we are now going to fight to stop them from harassing us anymore. Unfortunately, that is sometimes what it takes. And after having fought them and having driven them away, we now come to be in possession of the territory that they once had. Make sense? Sound like a familiar issue? Yes. So having this territory, which was not part of the land of Israel, having this territory is going to raise a new opportunity or a new challenge, depending upon how you want to look at it. Make sense? Okay, so we're dealing with this new chunk of land, not part of Israel. It's just across the Jordan River in modern-day Jordan. And we're in chapter 32. It's page 949. Chapter 32 of the Book of Numbers, Bamidbar. I'm going to need a volunteer to read since our regularly scheduled volunteer was not able to be here today.
I'm happy to start, but I'll be leaving, so.
Oh, well, you know, we'll do fine. Go ahead.
Okay, 32. The Reubenites, and the Gadites.
Right, so the Reubenites and Gadites, these are the tribes, right? The tribe of Reuben and the tribe of Gad. These are the two groups that are at the focus of this conversation. Keep going.
Own cattle in very great numbers. Noting that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were regions suitable for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community.
Right.
Said,
Aaron has already died, so Eleazar, his son, has become the new Kohen Gadol.
Said Aktoro,
Good luck.
Zebon, Jazer, Nimrah, Eshban, Eliela, Sabam, Nebo, and Dion.
Mm-hmm.
The land that the Lord has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. It would be a favor to us, they continued, if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Do not move us across the Jordan.
All right. So, perfectly reasonable request, right? Right.
Stay where we are.
Right. Well, you know, we've got. I'll do a rough border of Israel, as I often end up doing. Right. So you've got Israel roughly like this, right? This is the land. This is water down here. This is Sinai Peninsula over there. So this is the land that we were roughly promised under Abraham. And we have ended up now coming over to here. And this area is cattle country, right? It's Marlboro land. And these guys got cows. So it makes sense. Why can't we just carve out a chunk here, and this will be our territory, and that way we don't have to go across the river into Israel proper? Reasonable request? Right? What may be some of the issues here?
It's not the land that God gave us.
All right. So first of all, it's not the land that was part of the covenant. This is not in the territory that we were expecting to settle, but we conquered it. And God conquered it on our behalf. So kind of, if God didn't want us to have the land, why did he conquer it for us?
It's splitting off from the other families.
All right. And we are now separating from the other tribes, right? So you're going to have two tribes over here and the other guys over here. Like, but you're not going to be with us then. You'll be over there. Any other issues you might?
Yeah, you'll be living among the Midianites and all those folks who are idolaters.
Well, there was a fairly extensive war in the sense of wiping out much of the population, but the potential for cultural influence and invasion is much greater over here. Absolutely. How about some ingratitude? God has offered you this and you say, I'd like to have that. Right? Someone offers you a free car and you say, that's very nice, but I'd rather have the bicycle. Okay, but you could at least show some gratitude for the car. And one more thing that you're not quite thinking of, because you're not standing at the threshold of the land of Israel. What's different functionally about this land and the rest of Israel at this precise moment in history?
Different functionally.
Mm-hmm. Functionally, what's going to be different about the life you can expect to lead?
Oh, well, they've already conquered this.
Exactly.
Now they got to go fight again in Matot.
This is a peace. Right? They've conquered it. They've beaten up all the people who were attacking them from there. They have subdued the entire region, and it's a peace. Whereas over here, it is going to be full-on sword fighting mayhem. The whole book of Joshua and the book of Judges, and additionally, and then the books of Samuel and the books of we got war going on over here for another long, long time, and you want to stop over here now that this fighting is done. Okay, so are they complaining about what God has offered them and say they'd rather have this better? Are they just being selfish, or are they just being practical? We got cows. Or are they even being generous? Think for a moment. If these guys stick over here, that's 2 fewer tribes you have to divide up the rest of the land with. Right? So that's more for everybody on this side of the Jordan if they're over here.
So none of the other tribes had cattle. They just had goats and sheep and stuff.
Not as extensive, apparently, as these guys, or this was the focus of their livelihood. By the way, this is coming right at the end of the book of Bamidbar also raises a very sort of, wait a minute.
Where'd all these cows come from?
Thank you. What do you mean you got a whole bunch of cows? What was like one of the most famous things they complained about?
No meat.
We don't have any meat. Right? Remember the whole story with the quails and when they were rebelling against Moses? Because we don't have any meat. We don't have any meat. You've got herds. What do you mean you don't have any meat? They didn't have any free meat. You got free manna, but you didn't get free meat.
Were the cattle taken from the people that they bought and obtained?
Well, it says very clearly when we leave Egypt that we go with our herds.
Yes.
and with our flocks. So we might have added to our herds at this point, but then the adding to the herds would have been distributed among all of the Israelites, not just these 2 tribes. So for whatever reason, they seem to have left Egypt with bigger herds than everyone else. And they would now like to have them live here in the wild cattle country of Transjordan.
Siphon off their cattle. Yes.
And siphon off their strong arms from the war that's about to take place on the other side, which is going to explain Moses' reaction.
Moses replied to the Gadites and the Reubenites, "Are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them?
Right? Wait a minute. You realize you start talking about settling down here, everyone's going to want to settle down here. You are sucking the morale out of the people.
That is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to survey the land. After going up to the Wadi
Eshcol,
and surveying the land, to the Wadi Eshcol and surveying the land, they turned the minds of the Israelites from invading the land that the Lord had given them. Thereupon the Lord was incensed, and he swore, none of the men from 20 years up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me. None except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they remained loyal to the Lord. The Lord was incensed at Israel, and for 40 years he made them wander in the wilderness, until the whole generation that had provoked the Lord's displeasure was gone.
So you think they hit a nerve mentioning this to Moses? Moses is like, oh, we're going to have the whole spy thing all over again. Right? 40 years ago, I sent spies up and they came back and, oh, it's too bad. We can't do it. And now you guys say, hey, we've already won one more. Why not just stop while we're ahead and settle down right here? Everyone's going to want to settle down here. We're just going to make Israel on this side because everyone's going to be saying, well, wait, if there's a choice between fighting and stopping, then stopping, please. Moses clearly is taking this as a huge, huge problem. And so his final rebuff should not be too surprising.
Now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel. If you turn away from him and he abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all these people.
All right. So Moses just sees this as being a repeat performance. Been there, done this. We know how this ends. You guys are tearing the nation apart, which would imply, therefore, that his answer is, for their request, no. So they're going to make a retort. Now, we're not going to go into the retort because we have other things to do. But just so you know how the story ends, they say, no. It's not like that. We just want to settle here because it's better for our people and for our flocks. We will go as the soldiers. We will be the shock troop, the vanguard of the army. So we're not trying to get out of the war. We just want to claim this, settle this, because it is preferable for our economic livelihood. But we are not separating ourselves from the people. We are not saying we shouldn't go to Israel, and we are willing to march right at the front of the army to prove that we are on that side. So they come back and they do make a proper gesture. Whether or not they would have volunteered if Moses hadn't been so angry, we can debate that another time. But why are they making this request in the first place is the fundamental question. Right? Why are they asking to stop over here?
So it isn't just the fact that land is good for the cattle.
No, it is just the fact. And that's the point that I want to sort of, point out that the rabbis and our sages were constantly on guard for. Right? So we might say, as being good modern people, this makes perfect sense. Right? It gives more land to everyone else, which essentially means more money to everyone else, and it lets them be more profitable and economically sustainable on this side. The problem is that is not supposed to be the measure of what we do. The greatest economic benefit to everyone is not the bar that we set for what are good choices and what are bad choices. That is why Moses is so upset. They are not saying, look, the land that God said we are going to go to must be the best place for our spiritual, personal, communal existence. So how could we even dream of living somewhere else? They're saying, one land is like any other land. The one God gave us is, nice, but this land seems better for us. And since better for me is the ultimate definition of what is good, let's stop here. And it's that flipping of what are you using as the measure for what should be or shouldn't be your priority that our sages are so alarmed by. And not just them. If you look at the handout, the first two quotes here are not from the sages. Those are from other parts of the Tanakh, other prophets that come later. Would you mind going on, Miriam?
Wealth is treacherous, and the arrogant are never at rest. They open their mouths as wide as the grave, and like death, they are never satisfied. In their greed, they have gathered up many nations and swallowed many peoples.
Right.
When I
Well, let's make sure we understand Habakkuk first.
Yeah.
Right. First of all, just because I love Habakkuk and he doesn't get enough screen time. They open their mouths as wide as grave. They're never satisfied. Those that are pursuing are constantly in motion. They want more. I mean, think about it. This land is good for the cattle, but over here might be even better. Maybe we should attack them and take that. Maybe over here might be good, and we could attack them and take that, because that would also be good for our cows. Yet what has God consistently said throughout our journey? We are not allowed to take the portions that were allocated to other peoples, right? The Edomites, they get to keep their land, right? The other nations that God has said, you have a right to live there, you have a right to give there, you have a right to live there. We are expressly prohibited in our journeys from attacking them and taking their lands. We can defend ourselves and often have to, much more often than we would like. But most of these nations have fixed allocations and we're not allowed to take. So if we're just deciding to settle wherever it's best for us, then we will move like every other empire throughout history, just taking whatever we think will be better for us. And that is a very bad recipe. We know, being on the receiving end, what happens when the Greeks did it and the Romans did it and the Persians did it and the Babylonians did it and the Assyrians did it. We know exactly what happens once you get into that mode of opening your mouth wide as the grave to consume all that you can. And next quote from Hosea.
When I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot.
All right, so this helps us understand that opening line of Habakkuk, which I kind of glossed over on purpose. Wealth is treacherous, and the arrogant are never at rest. Hosea brings a line that is reinforced throughout other places in Torah and the prophets as well, more than I could conveniently list. This idea that having plenty is a really, really dangerous place to be. I know we like the idea of having enough. We like the idea of having more than enough so that we feel safer and secure. But according to the Tanakh, according to the Bible, that is a dangerous position to be in. Wealth is treacherous. That when I fed them, they were satisfied. Once they were satisfied, they became proud. When they become proud, they forget me, says God, and then, as we all know, it falls apart. That pattern happens again and again throughout the Tanakh. We see it in the book of Judges. Most explicitly, almost every chapter is things were bad, we prayed, God sent somebody who helped us, things got good, we turned bad again. Things got bad because we were bad, we prayed, God sent someone to help us, things got good, we got proud, we got bad, things got bad again. Things were bad, we pray, over and over again. We see this throughout our biblical history, and over again, we see it throughout personal history. That the person who is working hard to make something of themselves, all throughout that journey, they are struggling and they are good. And when they reach the pinnacle of their achievement, more often than sometimes we care to admit, they often forget the values that led them to that pinnacle. And they sit at the summit and they turn arrogant. And arrogance and pride, I think the phrase is, goeth before the fall. And the rabbis are very worried about this. The Reubenites, the Gadites, they are thinking about their money first. It's what cattle represented in the ancient world. They're thinking about their investments, and they want what's best for their investments. And there's nothing wrong with asking what's best for my investments as a second question, but they put it first. And as we're going to see, that is going to lead into a very long midrash trying to help us learn what's going on here. But before we get into the midrash, questions, comments, reflections, thrown fruit. All right, onward.
The tribes of Reuben and Gad possess more wealth than the others. Judah loved their material possessions, and this is what encouraged them to separate from their brethren, the other tribes, to the extent that they wanted to make their residence on the east bank of the River Jordan. A look at history will show us that these tribes were the first to be exiled from their land. Both they and half of the tribe of Manasseh, who had also taken up residence on the east bank of that river. They were exiled.
That's okay. You can read the parentheses.
About 20 years earlier than the other tribes.
Right, so if you read through the story of the tribes of Israel, you'll see that these guys over here, they were the first to go when the empires came in, because the fortress cities like Jerusalem's a little bit further south, and such, these were the parts that were able to defend themselves. All of these peripheral suburbs, if you will, they were just rolled over by the attackers, and their people were carried off into captivity. So it may have looked like a really good investment, but the fact is you were the first to go when the wars began, because you were separated from your fellows. If you had been stuck with us, then you could have retreated into our cities, you could have helped us defend our land, and once the attackers were gone, you would have been able to return, as the rest of us did, out to our farms and holdings. Way over there, no way for us to help you. This is, long before you have tanks and fighter planes that can go help. So they loved their possessions enough that they valued it more than the rest of us, and that led them into a trap. That led them too far to be defended. Make sense? Maybe? Okay. Onward.
Man must not boast of his wealth, as it may be here today and gone tomorrow. It is God who has given him wealth, and it is he who will deprive him of it when he sees fit to do so.
So one of the most underlined themes throughout the book of Numbers that we just read, and also in more specifically in the book of Leviticus, is the whole sabbatical year idea and the Jubilee year of the release of the land. The land was given to us by God, but it was given to us by God. We didn't earn it, deserve it, work for it. Therefore, everything we have gained from it and all the repercussions to the modern day, those are all gifts. And yes, we should be happy with what we have done with our gift, and we should definitely try to continue to enrich our gifts and make them better. But all of them are not ours in a fundamental sense. Those gifts belong to God. And if they disappear tomorrow, how would that be different than when they appear tomorrow? God gives, God takes. So why would you brag about your stuff? Why would you be proud of your stuff? It's not your stuff. Ultimately, it's God's stuff. And ultimately, when you're gone, your stuff will remain. And when your stuff is gone, you'll remain. There is no intrinsic link between you and your stuff. It is not part of your identity. It is not part of your essence, and it is not one of your accomplishments, because it is completely separate from you. And yeah, I know that is just destroying all the advertising campaigns that are on TV and everywhere else that try to make us think that we are our stuff and that getting the right stuff will make us better us's. Not so says the Torah, not so says the rabbis. Stuff is stuff, it's useful, it's needed, absolutely, and it is a blessing for which we should be thankful. Just don't get too full of yourself because you got a bunch of stuff. Onward on that theme.
Our sages said that God gave mankind 3 gifts. They are wisdom, strength, and bravery.
Strength and bravery,
Strength and bravery and wealth. Whoever is endowed with one of these gifts has actually been endowed with all 3 of them. How is this line to be understood? As long as these gifts are the result of studying the Torah and being God-fearing, unless these endowments are the product of the above, they are useless in the end. This is why the prophet Jeremiah has said in Jeremiah 9:2, let not the wise boast about his wisdom, let not the strong boast about his strength, let not the rich glory in his riches, but only in this should one glory, if at all, in his earnest devotion to me. For I, the Lord, act with kindness, justice, and equity in the world.
All right, so from Jeremiah, and the common theme that, as I said, is throughout the books of the prophets, he's saying, yeah, people have wisdom, people have strength, people have the wealth. But you just have those things. They're not you. You're not allowed to brag of them. And even then, if you have them, there are two different ways you can get them. You can either get them because you are a good person who has somehow earned them in the way that you live, or because you have made them your priority and you have fought and taken them just because you wanted it. And they are only considered blessings if it's the first variety. Right? That distinction makes sense? Maybe a little bit. It's a little confusing because we tend to think, and we're very results oriented, that the results are what matter, and if you've got it, then that must mean that somehow you've earned it. What is being said here in the Midrash is no. You can be wise without having truly earned it in the right way. It's called being clever. You've never met someone who was very, very gifted intellectually and had spent many years learning much and getting sharper and sharper, but they were a fundamentally flawed human being. They just weren't very nice. They lacked human compassion and decency in many ways. That's what's being talked about. Strength is perhaps the easier example for most of us to see. There are people out there who are incredibly strong, incredibly muscular and well-developed and athletic. We're about to see many of them at the Olympics that are at the pinnacle of human physical achievement. And many of them are also not very nice people. I mean, do we have to point out all the scandals plaguing modern sports stars, people who are at the top of the game? And of course, wealth. There are people who pursue wealth as the only ambition in life, and many of them achieve their ambition and in the process do not display very fine human characteristics. And so the prophet Jeremiah says, don't be going around bragging of about your wisdom, about your good body, your strength, or your wealth. If you want to be proud of something, there's only one thing to be proud of, and that is your understanding of God. And your understanding of God as the Lord who acts in kindness, justice, and equity. That is what you should be focused on. And that is the only achievement that you own, is your understanding of God. Onward, it'll be a little bit clearer, I hope.
The three outstanding examples of the endowments called wisdom, physical strength, and material wealth. That is, the wealthy Korah and the wealthy Haman were symbols of the latter, one Jewish, one non-Jewish, who came to a totally disastrous end, each after having boasted of enormous admiration amongst his supporters. They had both displayed what we call wisdom, and instead of this helping them, it led them to an early and ignoble death. They had not been endowed with their wealth from God, but had acquired it by immoral means. Solomon in
Kohelet, that's the book of Ecclesiastes.
5:12 refers to this when he said that riches hoarded by their owners led to their misfortune.
Both are fine. So he's saying you got Korach and you have Haman. This is not something that is unique to the Jewish people, that both of whom were very wealthy and very well established. And both of them were wise by any means of defining that word. They were both very clever men. And yet that led to their ultimate self-destruction. As I know that I've said before, if you think about Haman in particular, he is a tragic figure, right? He had it all. He was number 2 of the greatest empire on earth at the time. He had wealth. He had a incredibly successful family. He had friends aplenty, and he had plenty of people subservient to him. The only thing he lacked was the patience to overlook the one guy who wouldn't grovel. And because he wouldn't overlook it, he came up with this incredibly complicated plan that would annihilate an entire nation out in his fit of anger. And that triggered all the events that led to his own destruction and the loss of him and his family and everything else. He didn't need to go that path. If he had been satisfied with what he had, if he hadn't felt the need to force others to grovel, if he hadn't abused what he had amassed, his wealth that he had used to purchase us as his victims and his wisdom with which he schemed, if he hadn't used that to those ends, he could have been fine. There was no inevitability to his loss. He wasn't a pure evil person who set out to do evil from the beginning. He convinced himself that what was evil was right. And he convinced himself because he became arrogant and proud thanks to his station and his abilities. That makes sense?
Yes.
Right? He wasn't the Snively Whiplash, cackling melodrama villain, that we often put on in the spiel. He was just a guy who rose far, rose high, and convinced himself that what he wanted was right. And anyone who disagreed must be evil. And he had the means to stop them, and he used them. And because the universe is designed by a loving God that is just and fair, ultimately he failed in the way he tried to destroy and annihilate our people. Okay, one more example of this. This is all taken from Midrash Rabbah, but it's been compiled in Ba'at Zikanim, one of the commentators of the Torah.
I have also heard an explanation on this verse along the lines of a statement in the Talmud, Tractate Nida 16. There is one angel who is in charge of everything connected with conception. He presents every drop of human semen to the Lord, and asking him whether the ovum this drop will fertilize shall be endowed with wisdom or foolhardiness, with physical strength or weakness, with wealth or poverty.
Right? The same way that we might nowadays talk about, is it going to have brown hair or is it going to have black hair? Is it going to have blue eyes? Is it going to have green eyes? Is it going to be tall? Is it going to be short? Right? What is the basic makeup of this person is what's being asked here.
He does not ask if the human being that will be born from this drop of semen will be a wicked person or a righteous person, as this is something that God has abstained from interfering with. It is the basis of the whole freedom, that is, image of God. God has given to man as opposed to the angels and the animals, not to mention inert parts of the universe.
So everything else in the universe has its course plotted for it, either by its nature, if it is a beast, by God's will, if it is an angel, or because it has no course, because it's simply inert matter, except us. We may have plotted for us our health, right? We may have our wisdom. And indeed, the argument continues to be raged over how much of our longevity and our overall basic health is determined by our genetics, and how much of it is determined by our lifestyle. Same thing with intelligence. There's a big debate still going on of how much of our maximal intelligent capacity is based upon genetics and how much of it is based upon lifestyle and conditioning and nurturing at a young age. And obviously the same with our strength, right? No matter what happened when I was born, I was not going to be an NBA All-Star. Just wasn't going to happen. I do not have the physique for it. I do not have the genetics that would lead me to that. Doesn't mean I couldn't have learned to play basketball well, but I was not going to ever reach that pinnacle. But being a good person or a bad person, this is saying it's not in your genes. You are not programmed by birth for being good or bad. That's what it means to be made in the image of God, that we are allowed that choice. Unlike everything else in the universe that was created, we were created in the image, which means we have more freedom than everything else in the universe. We are closer to God in that respect than everything else. We get to choose a path. But we don't always get to choose rich, poor, tall, short, healthy, not healthy. That just sort of can sometimes come. But good or bad is entirely in our hands. So which accomplishment should we be proud of? Whether we're strong or weak? Whether we're rich or poor? That's the only thing we can be proud of. Again, to harken back to that line from Jeremiah.
But that is determined by us, by each person.
You mean what is good or what is bad?
No.
I mean how good? Exactly.
Good or bad.
Being good or being bad is the only thing that is entirely in our hands.
But then go to the Catholic.
Everything else, I mean, even our wealth, which is, yes, very dependent upon how hard we work. But the fact that we were born in this country gives us an opportunity to reach a level of wealth that is not given equally to someone who was born in Rwanda. Did I have the good wisdom to choose to be born in the United States? Was that, just me making good plans? No. It was something that just happened to me. Therefore, whatever I make from here, yes, I can be happy that I have done well with what I was given as my foundation. But I have to recognize that I'm standing on a foundation that is much higher than the foundation for many other people. The only place we are all equal from the beginning, and therefore all equal to be judged by how much we have accomplished, is by how good of a life we have lived. Because whether you are weak or strong, whether you are smart or not so smart, whether you are rich or poor, you can all be good, and we can all be bad. And to go back to this idea, we see that thinking we need riches in order to make ourselves able to have a life where we can then choose to be good is exactly the opposite of the tendency that we see throughout the Bible. Having it good often makes being good less likely. We grow arrogant, we grow complacent, we grow self-satisfied, rather than continually striving to make ourselves a better person. Which is why we get a commandment to help avoid that on a daily basis, which is our final verse.
When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God, the good land he has given you.
And the mitzvah that we call this is Birkat HaMazon, the blessing after any meal that has had a substantial meal. We say, V'chalta v'savata, you will eat and you will be satisfied, uverachta, and you will bless. That blessing, despite what we may think, is not the natural result of feeling satisfied. The blessing is us overcoming the natural result of being satisfied, which is to turn away from God. Right? We eat and we're satisfied. What comes next by our nature should be, so I am complacent. And so I am self-satisfied, and so I turn from God. Instead, the Torah says, after you eat and you're satisfied, you are at your most vulnerable for that. Therefore, you have to bless in order that you not head down that wrong path. That you recognize that what you've just eaten, what has given you that satisfying feeling, came from God. It's not just you. And therefore, you are still going to be committed to the life that God has asked us to live. It's hard because we like to feel accomplished and self-satisfied and all of those things. And we can be proud of our achievements as long as you recognize those achievements are subservient to this primary goal. The primary goal of choosing the good life. And the good life is not just what is sold by the advertising executives. The good life is what the Torah tries to lead us to. Good? Good. All right. Come on, monitor. Wake up so I can. Did it not record? Oh, you're being silly. There we are.